I want to start off by saying that we have a problem. And the problem is how we define community. Normal textbook definitions of the word community often define it as the following: people living together in an area peacefully. Now, there's a few problems, because 100 years ago, 200 years ago, in fact, even 300 years ago, this might have been a possibility, but in a 21st century society, this definition failed to talk about diversity. What I would like to define community as is individuals that are part of different identity groups living together peacefully. Now, I want to ask you guys a question. We all come from diverse backgrounds and we live in different communities. And I want to ask you, and raise your hands if you agree, that the minorities living within your communities are having issues standing out because of the social institutions that are in place. So raise your hands if you believe that. Okay, so we have a lot of hands up. Now, I come from Pakistan, and we feature on the news a lot, mostly negative things, mostly about terrorism, mostly about negativity. So I want to pose another question, and please raise your hands for me if you are an avid reader of the news. Read the news 2-3 times a day. So raise your hands for me. Okay, significantly less, but so for those who do read the news, I'm pretty sure you'd have no problem telling me why Pakistan was in the news last week, right? So raise your hands. Who knows why Pakistan was in the news last week? Very few. Pakistan was in the news last week because an 18-year-old boy was attacked by a mob at a university because of his ethnicity. 2 weeks ago, a 7-year-old girl was raped and murdered. 3 weeks ago, a polio administration officer was killed trying to give polio drops to kids in rural areas. What is the common theme you see in these incidences? It is the theme of identity. Pakistan is going through a struggle where we do not know what being Pakistani really means. And as a Pakistani growing up in society, I never really thought about these issues because, one, we were never really taught to think about them. What we learned about was how it's important to grow rice in winter, or how our biggest enemy is India. But we never really learned why something happened. We learned that the Taliban were bad because they kill people, but why did they kill people? We learned that the government was corrupt, but why was the government corrupt? You see, there are loopholes in this education system that we offer to kids that basically offer no explanation as to why things happen. And that's why I went to a school in the Netherlands under the banner of United World College, UWC. Now, living in Pakistan as a 16-year-old, I saw these things come to light, these social issues. Women not being paid the same amount as men doing the same job. My friends living in gated communities of religious minorities because the government couldn't provide them accurate security. Or people with LGBTQ identities completely being neglected from society. These issues are very complex, and the complexity lies within one thing: colonialism. But colonialism is not the problem. It is part of the problem. The lack of change of mentality is the problem. The mentality that women are inferior to men, the mentality that LGBTQ identities or minority identities are an abomination to society, they have no place in the 21st century in any society. And the second thing it does is it undermines the work of your own people, your own culture. So instead of learning about Allama Iqbal, the national poet of Pakistan, we learn about Robert Frost. Or instead of learning about Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of our great country, we learn about Winston Churchill and his services to the United Kingdom. These loopholes in education simply offer us no explanation of what it means to apply education within our own context. And that's why I offer to you a solution and how I went about my solution. So in one of my econ classes, we discussed about an economic historian by the name of Karl Polanyi and his counter-movements. Now, Polanyi describes globalization by two ways: the pace of globalization, as well as the direction of globalization. He argues that people can reject globalization simply because of the pace. So if globalization is occurring too quickly, people can turn back and start counter-movements to globalization, reclaiming what's yours. And often, that is seen as a negative thing. But we should not be thinking like that. We should be thinking that counter-movements are the way to bring back society and bring unity into society. And that's why I'm going to offer you what I did as a counter-movement. So after I graduated my high school, I came back to my society asking, pondering questions to my people, interacting with people I would never usually interact with. And I asked them things like, will we ever see a second female prime minister in our country? Or will we ever see LGBTQ parliamentarians? Mostly negative results, but again, progress takes time. Regardless of what the answers were, I met an individual who was part of the LGBTQ community in Pakistan, and for me, that was a whirlwind of emotions because I had never really met someone who was part of an LGBTQ identity in a very conservative concept. There's one thing learning about your queer theories in a Western concept, your emancipation of gay rights, but in a very conservative concept, you have this plethora of questions which I asked this individual. And I wouldn't want to share them on stage. But one thing I would like to tell you is what I took away from that conversation. And what I took away was the fact that we need to build up tolerance. By and large, people in Pakistan, minorities specifically, are left to deal with themselves. There's no assistance for them. They're often left out of society. And that needs to change. So I kept meeting with this individual quite a few times, and I was introduced to a larger group of the LGBTQ community. And I wanted to use my positionality, my privilege in a Pakistani context to positively affect and move these minority identities up the ladder in terms of society and in community. Make them more engaged in the community, make them more accepted in community. So I proposed an idea of writing a book that encapsulates the experiences of a 16-year-old boy in Pakistan who is part of the LGBTQ community. The book itself is fictional, but serves to encapsulate the examples and the stories and the experiences that were told to me by the individuals of the LGBTQ community in Pakistan. All of the good, all of the bad, and all of the ugly. Now, I understand the book itself would be very critically taken. It will not be accepted because of the fact that this is a very taboo subject in my community. We don't talk about things like this because we were never really taught to think outside the box. And it is to blame, the education system is to blame for that. But also we are to blame for that because we never challenged the educational system. I never challenged my educational system until after my high school. We never challenged what we learned because what we learn in class, we always often take as Bible, as the truth. And that's the wrong idea. Education is about expanding your horizons, but also critically questioning why what we learn and why is it applicable in our societies. And that is the reason I'm writing the book. I want to challenge these dominant structures within my society that limit the progression of the minority groups in my country, particularly the LGBTQ. I do accept that there will be criticism, there will be threats, because I don't feel as if today, tomorrow, or maybe even the next year is the right time to introduce this subject, but when will be the right time to introduce sub-subjects? All I hope is that people take away what the main message behind the book is. It is not to attract people towards liking these people. It is not to make sure you join the gay agenda. But the point I'm trying to make is we need to build tolerance. No matter where you're from, where you come from, who's your daddy, like all of those things. It's all about tolerance, accepting who people are. Now, my TED Talk serves to talk about one thing and one thing alone. Not my project, not what I did, not what my movement is, but what you can do. I want you people to leave this talk inspired and to think about the ways you can affect your communities positively and how you can help minorities within your societies, within your communities, positively. So, my parting question for you is, what will you do about it? Thank you.